Donna, thank you. That was just a perfect bridge into this final conversation. Over the last 2 days, you've heard a lot about the story of NCCI. And the theme that has come through clearly, yes, Donna just said, you might hear it one more time, is that every state has a story. And in many of our slides, California and New York certainly had a starring role. More than once, they showed up on very different ends of the charts that Donna shared. And that's what makes this conversation such a perfect close to AIS. Andrea and Jeremy, I'm so glad you're both here. I also just want to take a moment to recognize the other rating bureaus that are with us today. We may serve different states, but we know that our stakeholders benefit when the bureaus stay connected, share perspectives, and maintain strong relationships. And I very much appreciate them all coming to AIS this year. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, Andrea and Jeremy. I just want you all to know that they have graciously agreed to a ding that's going to allow us to stay on track. You'll see that there's a time tracker on the slides, and when the ding goes off, we'll know that it's time to move the conversation along, because we have a couple topics we want to cover. Can we play the ding for the audience? Just so no one's jarred by it when it goes off. So we're going to start the conversation really grounding in the systems themselves. We heard about different systems and how those unique aspects of a system play out in the trends we're seeing. The details matter, the laws, the benefits, the regulatory structure, and the way each state's system is uniquely designed to work. So Jeremy, I want to start with you. New York is one of the largest and most closely watched workers' compensation systems in the country. What should the audience know about the New York system? What makes it distinct? And what's top of mind for you right now?
Thank you, Tracy.
A Bostonian, a New Yorker, we had to do it, right?
Starting
Go ahead.
There are two characteristics of the New York environment that I think are worth highlighting. One, stability. Two, public sector involvement. So there's one marketplace statistic in New York that drives a lot of policy. 80% of policyholders in the state are small businesses with premiums less than $5,000. And advocates for small businesses have told us that oftentimes small businesses don't have the financial reserves to endure pricing volatility, that they have a preference for stability. And our rate-making methodology reflects that preference. We've incorporated stabilizers into our loss cost derivation that slightly dampen the annual loss cost level change, whether that be an increase or a decrease. Now, a stable methodology also helps us avoid overreacting to a one-time system event. But when we do experience a significant systemic change over years, please know that those changes are going to be reflected in our pricing values. Now, this was a choice. There's over $5 billion of direct written premium in the state of New York, more than enough to implement a more responsive methodology. At the end of the day, our members adopt our pricing values. Our loss costs are not advisory. And to my knowledge, the New York State Department of Financial Services hasn't really approved any independently filed loss costs. So carriers compete in New York with their loss cost multipliers, with scheduled rating from which they can deviate by 5% in either direction, and other independently filed rating programs like large deductibles or retro policies. Now, the second item that I want to highlight is public sector involvement. The New York Rating Board sits at the intersection of varied marketplace interests in New York. Employers who are paying premiums, injured workers being provided benefits, insurers providing coverage, and policymakers. And we have a lot of connections and conversations with policymakers routinely. The makeup of our Board of Governors reflects that dynamic. We have private carriers as well as regulators, the AFL-CIO representing labor, the Business Council of the State of New York representing New York employers, all sitting on our Board of Governors. And so this diverse composition recognizes that while the New York Rating Board is a private association of insurance carriers, the New York Rating Board is responsible for serving the entire marketplace, all stakeholders, as a data-driven, objective organization. Now, public members also have representation on our actuarial committee so that they can meaningfully participate in the rating board's work. Our public members, business, labor, and regulators are represented by a public actuary who is jointly appointed by the AFL-CIO and the Business Council of the State of New York. And many of you may not appreciate that when the rating board is called upon to do legislative analysis, either by the governor, regulators, or the legislature, we work with our public actuary to do that work. And ultimately, it's the public actuary's judgment that's reflected in our pricing estimate. And so in a very real way, we can say that our pricing estimate is a joint effort by business and labor. Now, you asked of what's top of mind in Albany, Tracy. There are a few issues that I'll highlight. The first is access to care, and there are two threads here. There is a budget bill that's been introduced in Albany. Currently, only 10% of medical treatment providers in the state of New York are authorized to treat injured workers. And many believe that this has led to treatment delays, long travel times for injured workers getting treatment. The governor's proposal increases the number of medical providers in the system by permitting any licensed medical provider to treat an injured worker so long as they are in a discipline outlined in the workers' compensation law. And the second is medical fee schedule. Well,
would you like to buy a minute?
I'll buy 1 minute, Andrea. Is the medical fee schedule in January of 2026. Our Workers' Compensation Board promulgated a regulatory proposal to increase the medical fee schedule for a handful of disciplines. Those regulations went through the first comment period. There may be a second comment period. In all events, we are expecting a final proposal to be implemented by year end.
I wonder how much Andrea just charged you for that minute.
He'll find out later.
So, Andrea, California is enormous, diverse, complex. Can you just share a little bit about what makes California unique and what's top of mind for you and the California system?
Absolutely. One of the first things I would point to is the sheer scale of California. It is now the 4th largest economy in the world. We just beat out Japan, with a total work comp market of nearly $16 billion in gross written premium. And that scale is one reason why California is focused on a system that is sustainable, responsive, and grounded in trusted data. California has a competitive open rating system, so unlike New York, rates are advisory. So insurers have the flexibility to develop and file their own rates. Oftentimes, they will use the either approved or advisory rates as a basis, but there is that flexibility in California. And supporting that is a long-standing commitment to transparency, public data, and independent actuarial analysis. So very similar to New York, our governing committee is comprised of both private insurer members and public members representing employers and labor, as well as a consulting public actuary. And the public actuary, along with the Department of Insurance, attend our actuarial committee meetings, our governing committee meetings, and are an integral part of that process. to really facilitate open dialogue, bring in diverse perspectives, and help inform decisions. All of those meetings are open to the public, and all of the materials are published. So it is very highly visible information. California's system also reflects its diverse economy, strong worker protections, and a very active regulatory and legal environment. While fee schedules and treatment guidelines certainly play an important role, utilization and dispute dynamics really continue to shape outcomes in California. And a good example of that is system friction. It is a primary driver of both cost and claim duration in California, and that's driven by litigation, medical legal processes, dispute resolution such as UR, IMR, and medical lien activity, all of which add to cost and keep claims open longer than in many other states. And you can see that in the data. The share of claims still open after 5 years in California is more than 3 times the national average. And that structure really matters in helping connect California's system design to the trends that we're seeing today. So you asked about what's top of mind. California is seeing the most significant cost increases since before the SB 863 reform period that really began in 2012-2013. Accident year combined ratios have exceeded 100% for 6 consecutive years, which speaks to the sustained cost pressure in the system. Drivers are loss development, continued growth in medical costs, and sharp increases in both cumulative trauma, or CT, claim frequency, and allocated loss adjustment expenses, or ALA, both of which are now at historical highs in California. So taken together, these trends suggest cost challenges in California are not anomalies, but are continuing to build.
Thank you. And when we talk about how those are then manifesting, I think it was on one of Donna's slides yesterday where she showed the California filing and the proposed filing for New York. Again, numbers that were at very different parts of the chart. So we have the same broad system, but the way it's manifesting in our different states and different environments is quite different. I'm going to give you a little bit more time on this one, Andrea, because I think I'm expecting that everyone in the audience would love to hear a little bit more about the trends that were underlying the recent filing. You had another double-digit increase, or a double-digit increase in California just last month, the filing. But could you maybe share a little bit more about what are the trends you're seeing that were underlying the filing that you made last month?
Yes, absolutely. So we did file just a few weeks ago a proposed 10.4% increase in pure premium rates, and that is following an approved 8.7% in 2025. And as I mentioned, the biggest cost drivers are CT claim frequency, medical costs, and ALA. I'll start with claim frequency because that is where the CT story really comes into focus. A key feature of California's system is the ability to file post-termination CT claims. And that has a very meaningful impact on claim volume and cost. Non-CT frequency has followed national patterns generally and declined over time, although at a more modest rate. However, CT has moved in the opposite direction. Since 2021, CT claim frequency has risen sharply and now represents more than a quarter of all indemnity claims in California, and that is up from a historical average of around 15%. Regional variation has also long been part of the California story, with Los Angeles traditionally standing out. but CT claims are no longer concentrated in LA. While LA still has the largest share, we are seeing growth across the state, and especially in Northern California. Earlier this year, we conducted an in-depth CT claim study, and the findings help explain why CT matters so much in the state. First, 60% of CT claims are filed post-termination, and that is up from about 40% a decade ago. 99% of those are litigated. And even among other CT claims, more than 80% are litigated. And that elevated litigation is directly driving our rising ALA costs. CT claims also have a significantly higher share of interpreter services and medical legal costs, and they develop later. About 25% of CT claims have no medical payments through 18 months, and that's versus about 6% in non-CT claims. And it's an important point because that delayed cost emergence can mask early medical severity trends, which ultimately drives higher development. So when we talk about the cost pressure in California, CT really is at the center of the story. The second area is medical severity. We are seeing continued growth in average medical costs, which remain the single largest component of our peer premium rates. Medical services paid per claim increased 10% in 2024 and another 5% in 2025. And while we're seeing increases in inflation of medical fee schedules, upward medical severity pressure is really being driven by changing utilization patterns, dispute activity, and services outside of the medical fee schedule structure. We did see increases across several categories, including physician services, but the most significant growth was in interpreter services, which is outside of the fee schedule structure, and medical legal costs. And both of those are heavily influenced by CT. I was going to make another point on the medical, but medical legal costs have increased in the past 2 years, 13% and 14%. And that really is driven by more medical record pages being reviewed per report and more medical legal reports per claim. Interpreter services have grown 7% and 8% the past 2 years. So also a pretty big standout from some of the other service categories that are seeing more moderate increases. But medical legal really is a key driver and now represents 25% of CT medical payments in the first year, and that's compared to 2% for non-CT claims. The third area is ALA, and California continues to stand out. ALA to loss ratio in California is the highest in the country, nearly double the countrywide median. And this is following more than a 10-year period of relatively flat experience. But ALA since 2021 has increased 9% annually. And as I said, it's at an all-time high. And that increase is tied to longer claim duration and CT litigation. And again, that growth is more pronounced in Northern California. In 2025, we did a study to better understand the drivers of this shift geographically and the rising costs. We reviewed case hearing data provided by the Division of Workers' Compensation, and the analysis suggests that the broader geographic spread in litigation may be partly tied to a rise in virtual case hearings. So virtual hearings used to be about 10% pre-pandemic, but grew to more than 80% in 2024. So LA attorneys are able to represent cases across the state much more easily than they previously could. And that is especially visible for Bay Area employers, where the number of cases, the share of cases represented by Los Angeles-based firms increased more than 20% in the Bay. So it points to a shift in where pressures are building, and ultimately, California is facing some structural multi-year cost pressure driven by those three. I did it right before. Yes.
Look at that. Good job. All right, thank you. I feel like you just gave such a comprehensive state of the state in 7 minutes. That was awesome, Andrea. Really, thank you so much. Such insight into your filing. Jeremy, New York, so different. So last week, your board voted to approve a filing of minus 20%, over minus 20%. 10 consecutive years of decreases, and this one pretty meaningful. Can you just share a little bit more about, what were the trends you were seeing, what drove that filing? I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity in the audience on what you're seeing in New York.
Of course, Tracy. So I'm going to provide you with a very high-level diagnostic of the New York system and give you a heads up as to what you're going to see in our loss cost filing this Friday. We'll start with medical severity. Medical severity, we're looking at a 3% medical severity trend. Now, medical cost containment is the big story here. Over the past 15 years, the New York Workers' Compensation Board has implemented significant cost containment mechanisms. And I'll go through them very quickly. We have medical treatment guidelines, which I know everyone is familiar with. Medical providers have to follow those guidelines, and if they deviate from them, they can only do so with prior approval. Fee schedules. We have medical fee schedules, hospital fee schedules. They cap the amount of payments for services provided, and it's not indexed in New York. So every time the Workers' Comp Board wants to increase the fee schedule, they have to go through the regulatory process. Now, interestingly, in a medical payment study that the rating board did a few years ago, we found that fees paid to physicians for physician services to be only 71% of the cap. Likely due to carrier network agreements and the like. Nevertheless, when the fee schedule does increase, we are expecting payments to increase as well. We don't think it'll happen immediately. We'll have to wait for those network agreements to expire, but the new fee schedule will put upward pressure on those contract negotiations. We have a drug formulary in New York that expresses a significant preference for generics over brand name drugs, and to the extent the drug isn't named in the formulary, it requires prior approval for use. We have opioids, significant limitations on the use of opioids. Only permitted in limited circumstances, like immediately after an accident or immediately post-surgery. And when they are prescribed, they have to be prescribed in the lowest dosage and the most minimal duration. All of this taken together amounts to a pretty unique loss distribution in the state. Medical losses comprise only 29% of total losses. And so the medical trend increase, whatever it is each year, plays a fairly limited role toward the total trend. Now, indemnity severity is the next item I'll cover. We're looking at a 1.9% increase on indemnity severity. It's simply not keeping up with wages. Why is that? Settlements is a big part of this story. The percentage of claims that are between 1 and 3 years old are settling at a 30% higher rate in 2025. And we're also seeing a significant increase in claim closure rates, partially driven by those very same settlements. All of this is putting downward pressure on indemnity severity, as well as loss development. Opioids. I just chatted about opioids in medical severity, but I know everyone knows that it also impacts indemnity severity. The reduction of opioid use is putting downward pressure on indemnity severity. We did an indemnity severity study last September that showed If the amount of opioids used today were the same as were used in 2015, indemnity severity would be 24% higher. Permanent partial claims, we're looking at a lot less claims being classified as PPDs, as was in the recent past, also putting downward pressure on indemnity severity. The next is frequency, and this is really the big story in this year's filing. The amount of lost time claims per $1 million of premium. We're looking at a negative 6.1% frequency trend. Now, frequency has been declining for a long time, and that's been a national trend, except maybe not in California. In policy year 2019, the year of the pandemic, we saw a significant decrease, as we'd expect. It was a 6% decrease, but in policy year 2020, we got a V-shaped bounce back by 7%. Policy year 2021, relatively flat. But in policy year 2022, changes were afoot. We got a significant decrease of 7.8%, followed by a 7.2% decrease in frequency in 2023, an 8.2% decrease in frequency in 2024. The bottom line is that frequency has decreased by over 20% for the last 3 years. Now, part of the story here is industry specific. In healthcare, we've had a 15% increase in employment between 2019 and 2025, with a 21% decrease in frequency. In transportation and utilities, we've had a 27% increase in employment from 2019 to 2025, with a 24% decrease in frequency. Bottom line, claims are not keeping up with increased exposure. But let's take a step back. Let's look at the New York State economy from a 30,000-foot view. And there have been a lot of changes over the past several years, but let's level set first. Before the pandemic in 2019, we had roughly 8.3 million private sector jobs in the state. We lost 2 million jobs during the pandemic. Those jobs came back, and they came back fairly quickly. Today, we are at 8.5 million private sector jobs. Now, that's more than we've had in the past. However, there's been a significant redistribution of those jobs. In 2025 alone, jobs in private education and health services increased by 5.1%, whereas jobs in construction decreased by 4.3%. And since 2019, jobs in construction have decreased by 7%. Jobs in the retail trades have decreased by 9%. Now, as mentioned a few moments ago, from 2019 to 25, we've seen the largest job gains in healthcare, 15%, and transportation and utilities, 27%. Now, taking all of this together, let's take a look at our loss costs. As Tracy mentioned, on Friday, we will be filing for a 21.9% decrease in the aggregate loss cost level in the state of New York. The short of the story is that we have been seeing a post-pandemic...
Well, that's okay. I have a follow-up for you, so you'll have another.
Tracy, how much are you going to charge me for another minute?
I'm going to give it to you free.
All right.
But I'm going to ask you a question, so maybe you can finish yours and answer my question all in the next group.
Sounds good.
So when we first talked about the system, you said one of the hallmarks of your system and something that's really top of mind for you is stability.
Yeah.
And so maybe as you talk about the loss cost filing, finish your thoughts on the last one, if you could just incorporate sort of stability on one hand with a almost minus 22 on the other.
Will do.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Unlimited time. So the short of the story is that we have been seeing a post-pandemic aftershock on the exposure side, with wages and employment increasing and continuing to increase without a corresponding increase in lost time claims to offset that exposure. And I want to talk about claim counts for just a moment. And to answer Tracy's question, as I walk through this, take a note on the number of years of data that I'm chatting about and the long-term trend that we're seeing. Before the pandemic, we averaged roughly 57,000, 58,000 lost time claims in New York State. We had a little bit of a dip during the pandemic. It went down to 48,000 lost time claims. But in 2022, we were right back to where we were before, with roughly 55,000 lost time claims. But again, just like frequency, that story began to change. In 2023, that dropped to 53,000 lost time claims. 2024 dropped again to 49,000 lost time claims. 2025, we're now at 47,000 lost time claims, and that's a developed number. This dynamic, increasing wages, inflation, and decreasing claim counts is causing frequency to drop like a rock. And in the past, when frequency declined, severity, increasing severity often offset those declines. We've talked about medical severity, we've talked about indemnity severity. That simply isn't happening this year. Is this a stable system? As I mentioned in the beginning, the stability of our rate-making methodology prevents us from overreacting to one-time system events. What we see here is a multi-year shift in exposure and a multi-year decrease in claim counts, and our rate-making methodology will recognize that data, and it will flow through.
Thank you.
Sure.
Andrea, I just had a follow-up for you too, or just maybe a thought. You know, when I'm talking with our carriers, or just a question we often get is California a bellwether for things to come in other states? And I think historically it has been. You've talked about the unique nature, and I think Donna had some slides yesterday showing CT frequency for California versus all the other states. But it still is, I think, a question that's on people's mind is it a sign of things to come? We certainly, you know, Donna, I think, has her perspective on it and shared that, you know, what happens in California stays in California to a large extent, but history outside of CT has told a different story in prior years. But can you talk a little bit about how you think about things in California moving, or California being a bellwether?
Absolutely. We get that question a lot. And I think because of the scale of California, system trends and challenges may surface earlier in the data, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those trends are just simply going to migrate east, because as you mentioned, some are uniquely California, at least today. As Donna showed, claim frequency is declining in virtually every state except California, and that is you know, because of rising CT claim counts, which is, you know, partly driven by the post-termination filings. And for context, California's labor code indicates that workplace injury can be specific or cumulative, and that the date of injury for CT is when the worker first suffered disability and knew or should have known that such disability was the result of present or past employment. And that is a different feature in California than other states. So from a CT perspective, I don't see that migrating. Now, you know, again, California can be an early signal, but whether those trends emerge really depends on each system's design. Now, macro forces are often shared: medical inflation, wage growth, but things like claim mix, duration, and cost impacts are going to continue to just really be state specific, in my view.
Right. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move on to a different conversation, so kind of out of the numbers a little bit, and talk a little about how we as bureaus collaborate. I think it's again, another topic that we hear a lot about, of how do we all engage and interact. You know, we have multi-state employers, we have multi-state carriers, and I think it's important for them to know that we work together. And for me, I have found, especially over the last year as I've come into this role, that the collaboration among the bureaus is really important and incredibly valuable I think about it through 3 lenses. As we just did over the last 2 days, it gives us an opportunity to compare and contrast trends and ask those questions. Is something that's emerging in California or New York or Pennsylvania, are we starting to see it in NCCI states and vice versa? So we can share that. Our actuaries talk a lot, and so just a way for us to dig in and learn what others are doing. The other is we can learn from each other. So California for years has done a geo study, and it's something that at NCCI this past year we took 3 of our largest states. We worked closely with California to understand how they did it, and we did a regional study within 3 of our largest states, and so really learned a lot from that. And I think the last one is more consistency for our common stakeholders, so the data we collect and how we collect it. And Jeremy, over the last couple of years, you've thought about how we modernize data collection, and you brought in all the bureaus into that conversation. So as we think about the future of data collection, we're thinking about it as a team. And so I have found tremendous value out of the collaboration we have. But Jeremy, I'll turn it to you. Where do you see the value and benefit of the bureaus collaborating?
There is so much, thank you, Tracy. There is so much value, and you mentioned data reporting, and I think I'll start there. Many of you may not know that NCCI and the independent bureaus have formed a partnership, and the partnership is called the WCIO, the Workers' Compensation Insurance Organizations. The core function of the WCIO is to maintain a single set of data submission standards that can be used across all jurisdictions. So we know regulatory reporting is a necessity. We know it's also challenging. We know it's resource intensive for our members. Partnering across jurisdictions to maintain consistency eases the burden. It reduces the cost for carriers writing in multiple states. We are, as you mentioned, we're consistently working together to modernize our data standards, to make data reporting easier for our members in future years. But this isn't the only area of collaboration. A few years ago, we modernized the WCIO structure to facilitate learning from each other across jurisdictions. So we created advisory committees where our teams can meet, share research, programs across jurisdictions. For example, in our actuarial advisory committee, our chief actuaries gather and share research. And in our policy research and advisory committee, our underwriting services staff get together and discuss programs and class research. The bottom line is we've created these platforms, these places to meet where we can learn from one another, and hopefully, if we can, bring our programs into alignment. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I want to just highlight our classification systems. They are nuanced, and many of you might be surprised at how different we really are from one another. In New York, we are making an effort to be more like our peers nationally. And so our touchstone is, if we're going to be different, the data has to justify that distinction. But there's a lot of work to be done here. We collaborate with each other by sharing the results of our research and hope that we research the same class codes at similar times and that our findings bring alignment across jurisdiction. It's not easy. It requires all of us make a long-term commitment and stick with it. But we're on our way.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeremy. Andrea, I'll ask you the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, as Jeremy said, the cross-bureau work and collaboration, it just adds a lot of value to the industry and to our own organizations. Even through this process, I've learned so much more about NCCI, New York, and about both of you, and things that I can take back with me to California. So whether it's WCIO standards or joint studies like the mega claims report a couple of years ago, COVID, and sharing analytical approaches, that alignment on the standards, classification, shared research really helps reduce friction for our members who operate across multiple jurisdictions, and again supports that greater consistency, Tracy, that you mentioned. Classification is a big one that Jeremy hit on. We do annually classification studies, some are multi-year, and the partnership and engagement that we have across the bureaus and NCCI is such an integral part of that process. And what we learn, really helps inform a lot of our recommendations and approaches, because at the end of the day, our goal is to maintain the relevance of the class system and help simplify it wherever possible and maintain data credibility within each class. So we will continue that ongoing work. It also gives us a way to benchmark states against broader patterns and learn how other systems are responding to change. One thing I would love to really just recognize our other bureau colleagues in the room. Data that other bureaus share with us is a really key and important part of our annual State of the System report. So in California, claims reporting, claim settlement rates tend to be slower compared to other states, and the information that we get from other bureaus on their settlement and reporting patterns is very helpful and helps put California trends and outcomes into a broader context. I think we're going to continue to collaborate around AI use cases. There's so much opportunity with all the data that we all, manage day to day, and just improving efficiency, advancing our own data analytics, and hopefully spot some emerging trends earlier. The more that we continue to learn from each other, the better positioned we all are to improve system performance and deliver more value.
Awesome. All right, so we're on to our final topic here, which is sort of looking ahead and trends. And certainly a theme that we had throughout the week was looking at the data today, but also kind of keeping a watch on what's out there. There's the forces coming at us, whether it's change in workforce, the healthcare environment, certainly technology. There are things that, as you said, Andrea, we have to work together and share best practices on how we're keeping up with so much of the change that's coming our way. Jeremy, as you look ahead, what are the areas that you're watching that you think we need to keep our eye on in workers' comp?
So many different areas. And there are so many different things that will influence the New York marketplace. And as Donna mentioned yesterday, that influence could be region specific. It could be industry specific. First, automation. And I think we're already seeing a lot of this play through in safety and our frequency numbers. It's widely known, and it's public information, that shipping companies are beginning to use robotics in their distribution centers, so much so that the only time that an individual, that a human being is touching the boxes is when they're bringing it from the truck to your door, right? It's likely that this is contributing to our frequency decrease. Questions of, will distribution center staff be focused more on machine maintenance rather than moving boxes? Will this extend to other industries? Time will tell. Work from home isn't something else that we're taking a look at. Is work from home becoming a reasonable accommodation? And let me explain this with an example. You have an injured worker. That injury makes it very difficult for the injured worker to commute to the workplace. Now, before the pandemic, most companies, or I'll say many companies, weren't quite set up for virtual work. That was easily a lost time claim. Today, that very same injured worker could apply for a reasonable accommodation, work from home for the duration of the injury, and that may be really a medical-only claim. It may never transition into lost time. And if so, we're going to see that in our frequency numbers, which are frequency of lost time claims. In fact, we may already be seeing some of this in our frequency numbers.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Sure.
He doesn't want the ding.
I don't want the ding. I had one more thing, but I'm going to skip it.
So similar to Jeremy, one of the things that we are watching closely in California is just the continued advancement in technology, AI, data and analytics. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but other areas that AI can help improve outcomes is with like injury prevention, claim triage, medical business decision making. But I want to spend a second on data analytics, because Tracy, you asked a question yesterday in your opening that really resonated with me and is something that is constantly on my mind, and that is, will the data that we collect today be enough to understand the system of tomorrow? And that is something that we have kind of been challenged with in the past couple of years, as far as limited granularity in some of our existing data sources to really understand drivers like CT and the rising A-light. With CT, it's reported in different ways. There's often companion claims. It can be challenging to get your arms around that data. And so we did a special CT claims survey earlier this year that was an input into a lot of the information I shared, and then also the DWC case hearing data that I mentioned. So we are continuing to look for new data elements that we can integrate into our analytics to help us better spot emerging trends. And I think that's something that the bureaus, NCCI, are really all going to need to collaborate on going forward. And I know we're short on time, so
No, it's interesting. When I was watching Ethan Mollick's presentation, and I was laughing at the PowerPoint, but I was thinking data. That was sort of my view. So listen, this was such a great conversation. I absolutely feel like we could do this for another hour. I know that you all have to check out and catch flights, so we won't. Andrea and Jeremy, you both have conferences coming up over the next few months. I believe yours is in July, and then New York is in September, where you'll have an opportunity to get a lot more information on California and New York and what's going on there. So this is probably a good place for us to end. Thank you both so much. I so appreciate you being here with me. A terrific way to end this year's conference. And thank you to everyone who joined us this year. I hope you leave AIS with new insights, fresh ideas, and conversations that will continue long after you leave Orlando. I wish you safe travels home, and I very much look forward to seeing you again next year.